Well, welcome back to another Offstage, everybody. We are thrilled to have you here with us. Dean, the beard is coming in nicely. How do you feel?
Very manly.
That's right.
I've joined the club of distinguished men, many out there, especially in Ohio. And if I wasn't trimming this beard regularly, it would be way out to here.
It would be out there.
Oh my gosh.
This is how you'll let us know that you're watching our podcast. Is if you come up to Dean on Sunday and refer to him as the Platinum Fox.
You said the Silver Fox.
Silver Fox? You like Silver Fox?
I like that.
Oh, Silver Fox. Okay. So just Sunday.
Better than the Gray Fox.
Yeah, Gray Fox sounds really good.
No.
But Silver Fox. So just walk up to him and just refer to him as the Silver Fox, and we'll know that you're in on this podcast with us today. We're excited. We're
it's not about me.
It's not about you, but I enjoy mocking you. So it's fun. We are in the story of Joseph. For those of you who haven't kind of been with us, but Genesis 37 through 50 is kind of where we've been. So we challenge you to read it each and every week. But now we're going to kind of go into Joseph's darkest hour. I want to set the scene by asking you, how would you respond to this situation? Just you personally, okay? You have been literally forced to move to a foreign land, okay? You don't have anything, okay? Now, the good news is you're incredibly handsome. You are muy guapo. You are a good-looking fellow, okay? You're young, you're viral, everything is good. You somehow managed to get a job working in the home of the second most powerful person in that country, okay? You get this thing, possibly one of the most powerful person, okay? So you're working there. You're taking care of all of his things. You're kind of his butler, his whatever, all these things. Then you're accused by a family member of doing something that you did not do, but you can't prove it. In fact, they can kind of prove it because you kind of left your coat there, okay? You left your coat there and all of this kind of stuff. And because of that, you get thrown into jail. Right off the bat, what's your response?
I'd be like, really? I mean, because you've already taken one hit from the blind side, right? To go from privileged son to slave. You've been sold into slavery, beaten up by your brothers, and then turn around and now you're falsely accused and you're a prisoner. No, I mean, it would be two big hits. Like, I can't believe my life is going down even further than a slave. Now I'm a prisoner.
Yeah, now if you haven't kind of caught on, that's basically the story of Joseph. Okay, yeah. Joseph was a privileged, wealthy, favored son,
right,
in the house of Israel, and obviously his brothers. We know a couple weeks ago we talked about his brothers selling him into slavery. Their original intent was to kill him, but they sold him to Midianite merchants, I believe, and they brought him into Egypt and sold him to Potiphar. Potiphar being the second in command, he ends up in Potiphar's house, and let's kind of, because this is an interesting thing. This is like the horrible time, and you're going to see that tough doesn't mean terrible,
right?
And hard doesn't mean horrible. We're going to see this in the life of Joseph over at least 13 years that we're looking at. But in Genesis 39, here's what it says. It says, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. That's Potiphar. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. It's interesting that he became favored in God's eyes and then became favored in man's eyes. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. So this is where we see Joseph now. He's been sold into slavery. He's now in Potiphar's house. And just so you know, slavery, they didn't have any rights. They didn't have any whatever.
That's right.
But we see over and over again this theme that the Lord was with Joseph. And that's fascinating to me because when you look at it from a world perspective, no, he wasn't. The world would tell you that, no, your God has abandoned you.
Right. Because the world's agenda is there needs to be blessing, everything needs to be going well. You know, you need to be succeeding, you need to not have problems and suffering and so, you know, we need to arrange our life to not be persecuted. Even today, you know, it's our whole thing. We want to avoid pain, seek pleasure. We're not getting that from God. We're getting that from our culture.
No, yeah, and I think you even said it on Sunday. Is that God's view of things is different than ours,
Right.
and it's like we want to avoid it, and kind of go through it. But this is kind of where he's at. So we pick up the story. He was sold. He's now in Potiphar's house. He's being blessed. Now, keep in mind, Joseph is 17, 18 years old at this time. He is incredibly good looking, is what the Bible says. That's not what I'm saying. That's what the Bible says. He was apparently very desirable. I have no idea what that's like.
And I'm sure for him, he had strong desire. I mean, his own temptations would be strong at that age.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is where we pick up the story. So basically the story then plays out. Potiphar just kind of leaves him to run his whole house.
Right.
Well, Potiphar's wife kind of looks at Joseph and is like, yummy.
Right.
And so she tries to get Joseph numerous times to participate in amorous activity with her.
Right.
Joseph, of course, continues to deny. And then there happened to be a time where she was in the house and he was in the house and there was nobody else around. And she grabs him by the coat and goes, "No, this is going to happen. You're coming with me." Well, the Bible tells us that Joseph peeled out of his coat and basically ran out of the house somewhat naked or, unclothed or, unkempt or whatever. And he runs out of the house. So the first whammy was he was being sold into slavery. He's sold into Egypt. He's sold away from his family. He's going to be away from his family for a very, very long time. He had these dreams that we're going to have his family bowing down to him. And right now, you got to imagine that they don't play a part of anything.
Yeah, they're not bowing down. They're despising, beating him up, selling him into slavery.
He's gone.
Yeah, they think he's dead. Yeah.
Right. His dad thinks he's dead. They tore his coat, all this kind of stuff. But now he's in the house. He's been blessed. Potiphar trusts him. Then this happens, and of course Potiphar's wife now gets angry because Joseph wouldn't do what she wanted him to do.
Right.
And so she has his coat. And so she goes, when Potiphar comes home from work for dinner, she goes, "Look at what this slave did to me. Look at what this Israelite did to me. He came in and propositioned me, and he tried to take advantage of me." And the story completely changes.
Right.
And of course, Potiphar, this is his wife. And if this happened in my situation, I'd be infuriated. And so he's infuriated. So he grabs Joseph, and without any regard to listen to Joseph, because again, slaves have no rights, he throws Joseph in jail.
Right. Because no matter how blessed it says he was in Potiphar's house, he had nothing. He had no protection, no rights, no possessions. And so, he in a minute, he can be abused like that.
Yeah.
No trial, no proof. Yeah.
This hit me afterwards. I think just the fact that Potiphar threw him in jail showed that he was favored by God.
Yeah.
Because a slave had no rights, had no family. He could have just taken him out and cut his head off, and nobody would have thought about it. I mean, Potiphar was right below Pharaoh. He could have just ended Joseph.
The story of Joseph, where Potiphar was played by Ben Kingsley, it adds detail, believable detail, and that he doubted his wife. Because we say this all the time, Lynn and I, in our marriage. I'll say to her, "I know you, wife," because he says that in the he goes, "I know you, wife," because he suspects that she's, but he has to.
And that works out well for you in your marriage when you say that?
Only a few times.
Okay.
With a big twinkle in the eye. Yeah, it's just, big time. When I'm sure we are joking.
Honey, hold your arm out. Okay, I'm going to step back. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, but anyway, so I think, I don't think it's conjecture too much to see that he didn't fully believe his wife, and he preserved Joseph's life, and through that, God preserved Joseph and the dreams that he had given Joseph as a teen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Potiphar throws Joseph in jail.
Right.
Because, hey, you hit on my wife, that's what's going to happen, whatever. And then Joseph is in jail for a long time.
Yeah.
We know he was sold into slavery at 17.
Right.
We don't know exactly how long he spent in jail, but we know that he came out of jail at 30.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so there's 13 years. How long he worked in Potiphar's house. Some scholars think it was maybe a year or less. And so this whole 12 years in jail. But it's interesting because we see that this theme continues in Joseph's life. If you go down in chapter 39 of Genesis, read verses 20 through 23. Here's what it says, right? Let me make sure I get the right verse. There we go. It says, "But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him." See this theme? This is awesome. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So Potiphar's house, same thing. The jail, same thing. The warden put a prisoner in charge of the prisoners, and then I just imagine the warden sitting back in his office, kicking his feet up, watching TV, and just like, it'll be taken care of. It's no big deal. That's amazing.
That wasn't Joseph. If it was just Joseph, he'd be a spoiled kid, right? He would just be a snotty
He's 18.
kid who's naive and sharing dreams unwisely with his brothers. His brothers hate him. He's got the code. He's walking around. Look at me. This is not Joseph that makes him succeed in these difficult environments. This is the Lord, which is striking because it's suffering. He's a slave, but the Lord is there. He's now a prisoner. Can you imagine a prison? Can you imagine? I mean, even today, a prison to me is one of the worst places. Just the food.
They're never happy.
The food, there's no windows, there's no decorations, there's no beauty. You're with bad people. You have no freedom. It's horrible, hard to think. Imagine that long ago, these places would be horrible. And people, the way they look at you, you're a prince. He would have no. He's going to have this amazing honor from his family, the whole world. But right now, you can't imagine any lower. And yet, the Lord is there. The Lord is with him. So that's the thing we have to get used to. Sometimes when our life, 13 years of waking up every morning, going to bed every night, saying to yourself, "What in the world is going on in my life?" And yet, unmistakably, the Lord is with you.
The Lord is with you, and getting up every day and working for the Lord.
And still serving and working. Yeah.
It's one of the biggest conundrums of Christianity.
Yeah.
In the fact that it's not about whether or not trials happen.
Right.
Christianity is the response to how those trials change us and grow us and mold us, and how we respond to the trials and tribulations and things that we're going to face in our life.
Right.
And it's interesting because now Joseph had these dreams that we talked about where, hey, my whole family's going to bow down for him. And then, if you were to go ask Joseph right now while he's in prison, if he thinks those dreams are going to be a reality in his human mind, no, not a chance in the world. I'm probably going to die in prison.
Right. Except for the fact that he has this amazing spiritual gift with dreams.
Yeah, that he believes. And so the Christian, the faith-filled side of him goes, oh yeah, God's still God, and he's going to do what he wants to do. And that's part of the reason the Lord was with him. Right. So it's amazing that don't be upset when trials come your way. Don't be bothered by that. Don't think God has left you just because you're experiencing trouble, you're experiencing hardship, or you're experiencing rough patches. That's not true. We see it over and over again throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, that the Lord was with him. He's been hit twice. He's been bashed, sold by his family, into slavery. Then he got a great job working in Potiphar's house, was very respected as a servant. And then, bam, he gets hit with this accusation, and he can't prove that he's not right, and gets thrown into jail. It's amazing. So it's not what we experience that matters. It's what we're becoming.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? So you fast forward in the story of Joseph. Joseph is in the jail. We don't know how long he was in the jail, but there's this thing happens with Pharaoh, and he gets bothered by his cupbearer and his chief baker. They get thrown into prison.
Right. Same time.
In the same prison as Joseph. Now they're under Joseph's care. Right. And then they have dreams. It's weird how much coincidence happens when God's writing a book.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is no coincidence to God. So both of these guys have dreams. Okay? One of them turns out good, one of them turns out bad. If you don't know the dreams, they're in Genesis 40. Okay? So the cupbearer's dream is good. He has this dream that he's going to wind up back in. Well, let's just read it here. Let's just read it. Wow. Rather than me try to explain it, if you're good with this, let's just read it. Here we go. Verses 9 through 14 of chapter 40. It says, so the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, in my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and will restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Joseph still wanted out, even though he was blessed by God. He still wanted out. So that's the chief cupbearer. He said, hey, you're going to be restored. Go down 2 verses, verse 16. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation of his dream, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Notice he doesn't tell him, hey, but remember me. He doesn't because you're going to die.
Yeah, no hope.
No hope. He goes, both of these are going to happen within 3 days. And we know, if you read Genesis 40, this plays out exactly as Joseph had said. His dreams.
Which is unlike a lot of prophecy today. It's vague and it's over years of time to prove it right or wrong. And by the time it's proven wrong, people have forgotten it's even made. They're not held accountable. This is very different. You can see whether or not this is true within 3 days, and it's very specific, and to one and to the other. And so again, extremely unusual. You just don't see this today, even with people who profess to have the gift of prophecy. This is a tremendous, powerful example of God and having a spiritual gift. Again, a sign of Joseph being blessable, being filled with God's Spirit, just like Daniel. We talked about the whole story of Daniel, earlier this, a few months ago, where Daniel also was filled with the Spirit and had God with him in a secular environment and had the gift of administration. So now this is Joseph being blessed in a evil environment, being and obviously filled with the Spirit. So yeah, he gives a very direct prediction. It comes true. So again, God's obviously working, and then boom. And this must be what, 13 years or no, 11 years in, because the last 2 years, the cupbearer forgets.
Yeah, so this plays out exactly.
Yeah.
3 days later, the cupbearer is restored, the baker is beheaded and impaled on a pole, and that kind of thing. But then at least 2 years go by,
and the cupbearer doesn't remember.
The cupbearer totally forgets, which is typical.
Right.
Let's just be honest.
Because things are going well for
when things are going well for me, I tend to forget about those who helped get me there.
Yeah, or even God, or spiritual things,
or even God. And so it's interesting. But let's go back and talk about the trials and all that. Like 13 years, Joseph is in prison, but the entire time the Bible tells us that the Lord was with him. And we have to have this countercultural mindset. You see, you said it well. Culture tells us to avoid pain and seek pleasure. Right? That's not the Christian view of how we should approach life. Right? Doing well in the Christian life does not mean that you're void of pain. You're void of, and I'm sorry, you guys can hear that crazy noise going on upstairs. I don't even know what's happening, but hopefully not. If you can't hear it, then we're just crazy. If you can hear it, that's what it is. All right? But it's interesting. Doing great. Like when you ask somebody, hey, how you doing?
Right.
In the Christian life, doing great doesn't mean that their life is void of problems.
Right.
It means that they're faithful to God and focused on Him over and over again. In every one of these troubles, Joseph found the favor of God, and he kept his life blessable, which I thought was a really cool thing. See, God doesn't think like us. And I had this thought, and I was actually having a conversation this morning about it with somebody. I said, listen, Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. If I wrote that, it would be, yea, though I avoided the valley of the shadow of death. Yeah. God says, no, yea, though I walk. I'm going to walk through it. I'm going to go through it. This is God's thinking versus man's thinking. I want to avoid any type of trouble in my life, and I want everything to be good. God says, no, I want to walk with you through the trouble. I want to be with you in the moments of roughness. And we have this weird thing. When we look back on our life, it's very, very easy for us to say, oh, I'm so glad that I had that horrible moment because that's where God grew me.
Right.
But if we're standing in front of it, getting ready to face it, what do we say?
Right.
How do I get out of this?
Right. Well, in all the good books, movies, stories, if they didn't include something difficult, they would be boring, right? If there was no struggle, we wouldn't read it. Like Chronicles of Narnia, filled with struggle. Harry Potter story, the books, filled with challenge and conflict. Most of the movies I watch are military about war, and there's pain. That makes it interesting. People want to watch it. If Joseph went from privileged son to exalted to Pharaoh's second in command and saved the world, it wouldn't be that famous story that it is.
Right.
It had to have this middle part where he suffered as a slave and as a prisoner, and then he comes through that. And that is the rhythm of Christ's life. That's the rhythm in all so many of our lives, that we go through something. We go through that struggle. And so you see it with Joseph. He had clearly to go through from the rhythm of his life as he had privilege in his upbringing, and then he had this amazing exaltation at 30. But there was that period. But it wasn't his whole life. It wasn't even the majority of his life. It was a long time, but it was not his whole life. It was something he passed through. And I think even Job, it's funny, people think, I don't want to be Job. It's like, really?
I just got done reading the book of Job.
I mean, but seriously, people think, oh, Job, well, that would be awful. Job was the richest, most blessed man in the world.
At the beginning.
And then we don't know how long his suffering was, but it wasn't relatively that long. He gets it all back double, and he's blessed. So, and then we know he's in heaven forever, so he knows God. It's like, oh my gosh, that man is blessed. He went through. He didn't stay and get stuck or lay down or stray and bog down in the valley of the shadow of death. He went through it. I know it's very motivating to me. If you're in a trial, that's not a time to get off track spiritually and get stuck and stay or lay down in the valley.
Double down.
Don't lay down in the valley of the shadow. Go through it and take the shortest distance from one point to the next. And that's usually what it's like. It has a limit on it, and you move through it, and God is with you in it.
Yeah, be a little stubborn with your faith when it comes to trials. Like, no, I believe God. You think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Hey, listen, King. Even if God doesn't rescue us, we're not bound to you.
Right.
There's a little bit of stubbornness there. Of no, I believe God is going to do what He says He's going to do.
Right.
And that kind of thing. And now, what's interesting is if you stop and you look at the story from a bigger picture, there was a lot of things that happened in that horrible time, that set Joseph up for the incredible time.
Right.
I mean, think about it. He was thrown into prison. He was given charge. He met the cupbearer, right? Which is a setup, because the cupbearer is who eventually remembers him and gets him out of jail.
Right.
And then sets up the rescue of Egypt and his family. And
providential things were happening.
During that rough time. Now, stop and think. We were having a conversation beforehand. Joseph was a slave. Did Potiphar have to really put him in jail? See, we forget that this is still the providence of God. Right. Slaves had no rights, no family, no money, no anything. Right. When Potiphar, okay, I loved your point about, well, Potiphar may not have believed his wife. But the reality is, Joseph being thrown in jail might have showed Potiphar as weak. He could have taken him out and just had him killed, and it would have been whatever, just another slave dead, no big deal.
Right.
Like, the providence of God had Joseph thrown into jail, as opposed to beheaded. I don't know how many beheaded people you know, but pretty much their story ends there.
And yet, that's so true. And yet, for Joseph, in real time, he's not seeing that. He's not feeling that.
No, not at all.
And we forget, we read in a few minutes what Joseph suffered for years. We're reading about a man's whole life in a few minutes. And it was different for him in real time. And it would have been, again, just 13 years of what's up, and I know for many of the people of God, they had to wait a long time for his promises.
I don't like to wait 13 minutes.
13 minutes. Abraham comes to mind. God has this amazing revelation and promises to give him a son. And he's like, that's awesome, because I really love to have a son, and my wife is barren, and this is great, wonderful. 25 years later,
you're going to be 100.
25 years later, he's still
Can you imagine
waiting.
changing diapers at 100?
And
not your own.
But again, we have to factor that in, that God's going to give us dreams, and we got to hold on to those dreams through all kinds of stuff that doesn't look like those dreams, and we got to believe in them. And that's why he gave them to him. He said, look, I'm going to give you something so exciting, and it's going to fill you with enthusiasm. And now that's going to get you through it may be years of darkness until that dream is fulfilled.
Yeah, Joseph still had these dreams. He still had these things, and he remembered these dreams. The ones that he told his brother, whether that was wise or not, he had these dreams that, hey, my family's going to bow down to me.
Right.
Now, if you'd have told Joseph at 17 that it was going to play out the way it does with the whole picture, he'd have looked at you and been like, no.
Right.
Right? And that's God. God doesn't give us the whole picture. And sometimes we get mad because God doesn't give us the whole picture. But the reality is, if God gave you the whole picture of what you were going to experience, let's just take Joseph 13 years.
Right.
If God gave you right now everything that you were going to experience for the next 13 years, your head would explode.
Right.
You could not handle it.
Right. It would be unpredictable.
Right. So God gives you what you can handle right now.
Right.
And wants you to take one step. He gives you one piece to the puzzle in the thousands of pieces of puzzle pieces that he has for your life. And he gives you one. And then once we put that in play, then he gets you another one. And then he gets you another one.
And your daily circumstances may seem very different from the dream. I mean, think about it. Your family's going to bow down to you. No, they beat me up,
Right, yeah.
They're not bowing down to me, and I'm separated from them. I haven't even seen them for 13 years. If you go to the worst point, it would be 13 years that he hasn't had any contact with them. He's homesick. He's missing them. He's thinking, what was that? And yet we know that his family comes back in through the famine. And so it's just this whole thing about God has to give us the quality of endurance and believing over a long period of time in the dreams that he gives us, because just like the ones happen in 3 days, so will the ones happen that took 13 years.
Right.
They're still just from the same God, just as certain to happen.
Same God, same power, same timetable, same. I mean, he's just God. Consistency. And so that's kind of the cool thing. But you see how when Joseph went into the secular environment, God continued to bless him. He never lost faith. He never lost. He didn't his
integrity.
His integrity. Even when he was accused of horrible things.
Right.
He never lost that ability to be blessed by God.
And he could have gotten discouraged. He could have hated his family and never forgiven them. He could have hated Egyptians for all the mistreatment.
Sure.
He could have just had a life of resentment, become very cynical. I can imagine Joseph coming to me as a pastor and saying, Pastor, how in the world can you believe in anything? Let me tell you about my life. And I would believe him. I would say, you're right. I can't imagine your life is horrible. How could you? And yet he didn't. He worked hard was another thing. He constantly stayed very diligent, which I think is very therapeutic when you're in the midst of a ringer or a trial, to instead of turning to other things that make it worse, like complaining or addictions or a lot of other things, you can work hard, and that work ethic can be have a therapeutic effect and help the time go faster.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It's the whole idea. And so Joseph kind of just puts his nose in the ground, sort of stays faithful to God. He goes, God, I'm sure God and Joseph had these conversations where he goes, hey, God, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I still trust you. Every day when his feet on the floor, God, I trust you. Whether it was a prison floor, whether it was Potiphar's house, God, I trust you.
And there were signs for that, because I think he had to feel the blessing of God even in these horrible environments. Even as a slave and a prisoner, he had to feel that he was getting the responsibility and that he was being wise in his managing skills and being trusted. I mean, that still feels good. I know that can feel good wherever you are, that your boss or the person who's owning you says, hey, you're really good at this. I'll give you more. Yeah,
I think you always know when you're being blessed by God. I think there's you may not be able to vocalize it or explain it. There's always an internal
sense of value.
There's something going on behind the scenes,
and I'm adding value. I matter to this person in my environment. Yeah,
and so he remained blessable. And as we kind of look to wrap this up, dive into the application points. Joseph never looked back with a what if mindset that we see. Right. He never looked backwards, because he was moving forward. He said, this is what I've been put into right now.
Right.
I'm going to work as hard as I can and be blessed in Potiphar's house and take this, and everything from Potiphar's house was blessed. Right. And then when he got thrown into jail, he said, you know what? I'm not going to come in here and wallow in misery and self-pity. Right. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to just move forward. And then he got entrusted by the warden and all that kind of stuff. He's moving forward. It's like, don't look back. You're not going that way. That's
That's awesome.
He could have looked way back to, I miss my coat, I miss my mom and my daddy, and I miss my brother.
As things got worse, the times were so much better in the past. That's a common thing. I remember the days.
For the good
I remember
old
the
days.
good old days. That's a lot of us do that. We're talking about a time in the past, and a lot of times that's because it's revealing that the present is not good. It's saying, you know what, I'm not as close to God, or as used by God, or as blessed by God as I can remember the good old days. And that's common, especially if you're hurting and suffering and God seems more distant. And he doesn't want you to think back. He wants you to think forward. That's good. He wants us to go forward. And Joseph certainly couldn't see how that or when. He had no idea that his time was almost up. And, I think until Pharaoh had the dream, he had no clue that was going to finally end his period of suffering, right? He had no heads up. He had no heads up. Oh, you're almost done. It's only going to be 13 years. He didn't know that. Yeah.
And listen, I think it's important to stop, and we need to wrap this up here in just a minute or two. But if you're waiting on your life to be set up perfectly by God, check whose version of perfect it is. Because your life is perfectly set up right now for you to do exactly what God wants you to do in this moment. It may not be perfect according to the world standards, but if you let the world standards creep into the Bible standards, it's different. Joseph continued to work. He was in a position where he could be blessed, and he could continue to move forward, and he could continue. None of this actually stopped him from believing in his dreams, even though it made no sense. When you look back on it, none of these things actually would have at any point went, well, your dreams can't happen. Like maybe in that instant, oh, you're in jail. Okay, yeah, obviously your dreams can't happen. But well, what if I get out of jail? Well, okay, there's always that possibility. He saw that the cupbearer got out of jail, so obviously there's a hope. He continued to do that. But the bookends of Joseph's life were amazing. But the bookends are really only amazing because of the story in the those darkest moments in his life led to the biggest victories. They led to the fulfilling of his dreams. And God controls everything. And so if you're going to take away anything from this, and as we kind of wrap up, God controls everything. So wouldn't it make sense just to trust him?
Yeah. And that's when we need to trust him the most, is in the toughest times, right? Yeah. And it's not as hard. We don't need faith as much when everything's real. It's all, man, I'm ruling the world, and oh my gosh, I'm saving the world. My family's bowing down to me, and I'm all about it. That's not when you need faith. You need faith when you're in the dungeon, or when you've just been falsely accused as a slave, and now you're a prisoner, and it's been 12 years and 360 days, and you're still. That's when you've got to remember the dream and keep saying, to believe. And to be faithful is to be full of faith. And so don't stop believing, don't give up.
That's your chance to sing.
Don't give up.
Stop believing. Come on. Hey, listen, no matter what you're thinking today, as we wrap up, do you have anything else you really want to say?
No.
As we wrap up today, don't stop believing. Don't look at your current circumstances as your future joy. Don't look at your current situation as the end of your story. Do not put a period where God puts a comma. God is working in your life. Continue to be faithful. Well, we'll dig into how he comes out of this next week, and really,
it's so good to have a story.
It's really cool.
These aren't just words. It's a story. It was a real person, a mentor that we love.
Yeah, read it with us. Genesis 37 through 50. Underline every time when you see it says the Lord was with him, the Lord blessed him. It's a challenge for me. I'm going to do that this week. Continue to go out and be the message. You guys have a great week, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Great to be with you.